back into it. So here we will look at the challenges, or at least one of the challenges for this workshop. The first challenge is a kind of a small group icebreaker activity, which we used a lot a couple of years ago when we had the larger groups. We did a lot of the small group activities in breakout groups in Zoom, and not necessarily so useful these days because we have smaller groups, but also we found that using breakout groups, I didn't realize it was happening, but I got comments back from students saying that they ended up in breakout rooms with no one who would talk to them, which ended up being like worse than trying to do nothing at all. So again, as part of our continuing, as students stop using Zoom, we've stopped using the breakout rooms as well. We've got to rethink all this stuff and try and understand what people actually want. Or our other option is to be, really punitive about it and start giving people marks for attendance and punishing them when they don't attend and don't contribute and stuff. And as criminologists, you'll know how that's likely to end up. How the use of getting tough on crime or getting tough on students is actually going to produce what kind of results it's actually going to produce. But the challenge too, I think, is worth having a bit of a chat about, getting some common ideas together, and that's just that starting point of what justice actually is, and thinking about and I might throw in the community stuff at the end that's relevant to the learning log. So does anyone have if you want to, you can say it, you can type it, a great sort of definition of what justice is? Doesn't have to be a complete meaning because no one has ever come up with a complete meaning of it. We've had
Do you mean a personal definition or what I read in the...
A bit of both. Like we've got stuff going back to ancient Egypt, to the old kingdom of people pondering this question. So no one's ever come up with an answer to it, but we can come up with little bits of answers and we can put all those fragments together.
So my personal understanding is that, the criminal is punished because moral panic and, society's happy if the criminal goes to jail. But after reading the reading, justice is that the wrong is righted in a way acceptable to both parties.
Yep. So there is that question of like justice versus criminal justice, and whether it's has whether what justice means inside or outside of the criminal justice system, and the definition you've laid out there is really focused on this idea of harm or wrong or injury and a remedy for that. So I guess one observation on that is it is often very hard to define when we feel just, but it's much easier to know when we feel injustice. It's like kind of hard to define when you feel happy, but you're damn sure we know when you feel unhappy. A lot of things are easier to define in their absence than their presence. So we don't usually sit and think, I feel really justly served today. I feel the world is working apart from the fact the world isn't working really well, but it's an experience we don't tend to have, but we are all really familiar with that feeling of harm, injury, transgression, injustice. And there's this sense of justice being a move towards remedying that, fixing a problem, whatever the arena. Where does justice come from?
The politicians.
If I asked this question 100 years ago, there would be a very easy answer everyone would give me. They would say it comes from God, and because God created a just universe. Today, it's like, oh, yeah, So there's a few different ways we can think about. I mean, one of it is not necessarily just thinking of politicians. Is that it comes from popular sovereignty. So politicians only hold power because of popular sovereignty, because the people are sovereign. We don't have a king that's sovereign. We have a king who's got a performative, symbolic role, but real power in society comes from the people. Therefore, justice comes from the people. Now, that often gets vested in politicians because we use a representative system, and we elect people to act on our behalf. It's not working out as quite as well as we hoped it would. Again, a couple of 100 years ago, and we're rethinking some of those things. And there's different options that are coming up, and I'm going to talk about some of those during this term. But generally, our sense of justice comes from this, I guess, a humanist idea that as human beings, we strive to be better, we strive towards justice, we strive to have a society that's just. Therefore, we elect people whose role it is to implement justice on our behalf. And that's an imperfect process, but that's what we hope happens. But as I said, go back 100 or so years, and the common answer everyone will say was it comes from God. Christianity was a very widespread belief. Judaism was fairly widespread in academia. Islam wasn't so heavily recognized, so most people would say, God is a good God. God creates a fair society. Man is created wicked and sinful. They do bad things, and it's part of the purpose of the divine will of the world to redress that balance. And if you don't get it redressed in life, then you'll go to heaven, and then you'll have it redressed in the afterlife somehow. I don't want to minimize those beliefs, because some people still have those beliefs. Fair enough. Have the beliefs. Your beliefs are your beliefs. But in society, we've moved towards that humanist model. We tried to replace it with this idea of public sovereignty and this humanist idea of people as being good. But we seem to have abandoned hope in that, as we've abandoned hope in God, that we believe that people are terrible, petty, awful, and that we don't really know where justice comes from. So what are some of the things, some synonyms around justice, some connected concepts we think about? We've talked about restoration in terms of restorative justice, in terms of fixing, problem solving. Are there other words?
I think it's all focused on the injustice at the minute.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The injustice that we all feel.
Yep. And we are constantly reminded of every time we touch any kind of media that how terrible the world is. And there is what's his name? There's a Marxist philosopher, Adorno, Horkheimer, Marcuse. I knew I'd get to eventually. Marcuse wrote a book called The One-Dimensional Man in 1968, 1969. He's quite an interesting guy. And one of the things he said about one of his critiques of the capitalist system, and this is in 69, this is like a Mad Men era, but he said that the capitalist system manufactures a constant stream of fear, of uncertainty, and bad news. He's very critical of the news system to undermine people's faith in humanity, because that has a very important purpose for capitalism, because it's like, well, you'll feel better if you go buy something. And this is boiling it down to its simplest. I'll type his name in, because it's not necessarily. I read his work when I was a postgrad, again back in the back in the early 90s, and there was a lot of light bulbs going on, and that was way before social media. And it's just become, his work has become more and more valuable, more and more relevant as time goes on. That capitalism loves to keep us scared, loves to keep us uncertain, anxious, and confirmed in the belief that our neighbors will, you know, do the worst thing possible to us, but for the criminal justice system, and that we can't trust anyone, but we'll feel better if we go and buy something. We'll feel more secure if we can buy a house in a nicer suburb. We'll feel better if we can buy a better car, or you know, that being said, maybe a bar of chocolate, if we can't afford any of those things, maybe a bar of chocolate will make us feel better in the short term. So there is, I guess, a really deep-seated social problem about where we see justice coming from. My generation was Generation X, and we were the cynical generation. And I don't think, and I'm part of it, but I think there was a real problem with just going, yeah, whatever, the world's terrible. We don't believe anything. We don't believe in ideology. We don't believe in faith. We don't believe in politics. We don't believe in anything. And there's that sort of nihilism that, again, makes ideas of justice really difficult, because you need some kind of secure place to stand in order to think that justice is important, that justice is achievable. So one of the things we can go for is, you know, basic belief that overall humanity is pretty good. This is sort of your humanism. Or if not, humanity is part of a cosmic order, whether it's from a deity or whatever your beliefs are about the cosmos, that things generally get better. That in the face of constant fear of war, conflict, climate disaster, and everything else, that humanity has pulled itself out of some really rough situations. And that, yeah, we're a very flawed species, we're very imperfect, but we can do better. We can do justice. One of the other phrases that we often tie into the ideas of justice is fairness. And that's focused on our procedures and the way in which we do stuff. Rather, it's not so much what we're aiming for, but the way we do things. That if we can do things in a way that's fair, then at the end of the day, we're going to get closer to justice. Or at least we're going to do it easier in a way than a way that is unfair. And a lot of that comes out of a history, particularly in the criminal justice system, of being incredibly unfair. Being decided by people who had clear conflicts of interest, people who just clearly use the criminal justice system to manipulate the poor. Think about the foundation of Australia. Think about the people who, you know, it's a cliche, but it's true. You know, you steal a loaf of bread, you get sent to Australia. It was a way of clearing out the slums of England in the sort of age of exploration through to the Victorian era. Criminal justice system was used in an incredibly political way as an attack, as a way of managing and controlling the poor. Places like Ireland, it was very much based on culture. So as a result, a lot of our focus on justice is about fairness. It's about procedural fairness. It's rights to due process, rights against unreasonable search and seizure. It's rights to a fair trial. We see these words come through our ideas of justice all the time. And a lot of it, again, is about as opposed to the way we used to do things. You know, we have judges now who theoretically don't sit in matters that they have a personal interest in. We have judges who theoretically don't get gifts from the wealthy parties involved in a trial. In the US, we are seeing a massive attack on this idea of rule of law as justice. We're seeing some incredibly corrupt things happening. And again, I know, looking at my Marcusa, we are being filtered to get the worst news about everything. But I am also genuinely concerned that our cynicism, or my generation's cynicism around justice and goodness and everything else, has just meant that a lot of people have gotten away with being more corrupt, because we've just go, yeah, what do you expect? Yeah, politicians corrupt. Someone caught out. They're all thieves. They're all corrupt anyway. And I think that's a problem. And one of the, yeah, go ahead.
Just here in Townsville, I saw a video on Facebook coincidentally, with all the youth stealing the cars and not being punished for it. You know, the fairness and we're gonna have vigilantes soon. But yeah, I watched this video and there was like 20 kids come out of a car. I'm like, how did you fit that many kids in that car? And the
You almost got
comments,
well done.
I'm like, it's a clown car. But the comments people were putting on this video, someone's like, put your phone down, stop filming, and grab one of those kids. I'm like, I'm not putting myself in personal danger to grab a kid. The police were around, you could hear them in the background. But yeah, it's going to become a very big problem.
Because with the lack of, and some of this is the fallout of that lack of monoculture. You know, when everyone was basically a Christian, and there were the Jews who we were kind of sort of sometimes accepting, sometimes not. But we had this Abrahamic tradition where we all believed as a culture in one source of justice and one perspective. And people had very different perspectives because society was really unfair, but there was one source of it. And what we're seeing now is this very much fractured idea. And it's very difficult to try and get everyone on the same page of saying, well, this is what we all believe in, and this is the same thing. And it's easier for the powerful, i.e. the media, to brand the deviant, the outcast, and the different as being the ones who are the problem. But we also have to think about the ways in which, you know, we do create, particularly in the terms of what we've done with First Nations Australia. And I'm not saying that anyone should be happy with having their car stolen. It would piss me off as an individual to have my car stolen. It's not even a very nice car, but I would be very angry to have my car stolen. But as a criminologist, a sociologist, a lawyer, which is what I guess I am, we also have to look at that social perspective and look at the way in which we find those solutions to problems by trying to get us all back to the big picture, including the people who are very difficult. And those are the people on Facebook posting that stuff, and those are those delinquent kids who are the flip side of that coin, who are also saying, oh, well, world's unfair. I don't have a car. Other people have cars, therefore I'll just take their car. You know,
they're all underage. They shouldn't be in the car. They're
yes.
as young as 9 in the car, driving.
Mm-hmm. So one of the arguments about restorative justice, and we do have to be a little bit Pollyanna. I don't know what's a more modern reference than Pollyanna, because no one knows who Pollyanna is. But we have to be Leslie Knope. We have to be kind of a bit willfully positive about the world to try and make change and to try and make a difference. Because particularly in this area, when we look at restorative justice, it is so easy to be cynical. It's so easy just to go that the world is terrible and none of this is going to work in the face of the evidence that it does seem to be working. But we also don't want to go too far, and we don't want to go, if we all go out and hug a teenage offender tomorrow, the world will be a better place, because it won't be. Particularly not for teenage offenders. So one of the things we're also going to come to with this idea of justice that comes out of restorative justice is it's sometimes really tough. And it's sometimes easier as a young offender to sit in court, to have some old white guy tell you that you're a bad person and go, yeah, grandpa, whatever. And to walk out and get a slap on the back from all your mates going, yeah, I got convicted by a magistrate. Yeah, I'm the man. It is much easier to do that than to face a victim and to go, oh, yeah, I really screwed up there. I hurt this person and I didn't think about it. And you'll know all the stuff from the earlier criminological and psychological studies about, you know, young people's brains not being formed completely.
The generational trauma, you know, parents in jail.
Mm-hmm.
It's safer to be on the streets than it is at home. There are so many levels. So many levels.
So this is, I mean,
I'm going to say, Scott, the downside of that is that the victim doesn't have to go to this restorative justice. You can't make them go. So not a case, and that's not successful because they don't want to.
Yeah, and we have to respect that entirely. But there are other options in terms of community My brain's just not working today. Community conferences, I was about to say conversations. Community conferences that involve other members of communities rather than just necessarily victims. There's all sorts of other options that have been tried that we're going to look at. But yeah, I guess this is sort of emotionally a pretty tricky subject. And not in a bad way, but I do think for myself, like I'm going back quite a while when I got involved in this area. But for me, my layers of cynicism was my armoring. You know, my belief that everyone was bad, that offenders were bad people, that the people in charge were bad people, that basically everyone was out for themselves. Friedrich Nietzsche was right. The world lacks all meaning and sense. I know myself that that was a form of armor that I had to get rid of to be able to actually engage intellectually with what was going on and with the potential of change. So I think this can be a really useful thing to study. I think it's very interesting, but I'm also acknowledging that it does require a bit of, I guess it's emotional labor along the way, not just to fall back into those easy patterns. And yeah, Townsville's a really, really tricky area to look at. I mean, even in my area, which is very, very kind of it's eastern suburbs of outer eastern suburbs of Melbourne. It's middle class-ish, pretty well off in terms of the world standards, relatively speaking. But we've had a gang, a small gang of First Nations youth who steal cars and come and smash up the windows in the local shopping centre, and everyone's pissed off with them, and everyone is quite right to be pissed off with them. And it's and sitting back and saying, oh well, you have to consider, you know, the long history of colonialism, doesn't help you when you can't open your business because your window's been smashed in. So you got to see all the points of view and all the perspectives, and that I think is part of where that emotional labor comes from, of being able to withhold judgment to the point where you are able to have multiple perspectives on something. You know, to know what it's like to be the local news agent who can't open for 3 days because they can't get their shop window replaced, but to also know what it's like to be a 13-year-old without hope, without any sort of prospects, whose brain is nowhere near developed, nowhere near finished, who doesn't have any positive role models in their lives. You know, it's complicated stuff. All right, so in terms of the learning logs this week, we didn't really get into the idea of what community is. We focused a lot on that justice question. But I guess community is the next step to think about, is to, well, how do we figure out who the community is? Who is our community? Is it the people who live in the same area as us? I remember an article a few years ago that was like in the Weird News that somewhere, I think it was Sweden, it might have been Norway, where there's almost a jury system for the local councils, where everyone's name goes into a barrel, and you get picked at random as to who's going to be the local councillors. You're not elected. And there was one of the musicians, one of the big death metal bands, got picked for their local area. And of course, that's kind of an amusing idea of them turning up with the black makeup and everything else, and just growling black metal ideas about when the bin should be collected and what should happen in the community park. But I think it got across a very different cultural idea from these Scandi countries, where it is seen as part, you know, your community is everyone, whether you like it or not, and whether you want to be part of that community or not. So that's interesting. I'll see if I can find out. It's old news, but I'll see if I can find that article and post it.
I think that's half the problem too. There is no sense of community anymore. Does anybody know their neighbors anymore?
Some people do. And one of the things I guess we can start thinking about is, how do we try and, this is I guess linked to positive psychology, how do we find where things are actually working and learn from that? Why, if we spend all our time focusing on why people end up in bad situations and committing crime, how do we understand why people don't commit crime? How do we understand where people have a positive experience of community, and what does that mean? So lots of things to talk about this term. One last thing to remember, please let me know what sort of format for the workshops you'd rather. And
are you going to give us some sort of survey thing, or are we emailing you? Or?
Yeah.
there's not many of you, just email me. Or if you
Okay.
prefer, I'll send you a survey. I can do that
Can you
too.
just put it in week 1? Can you just put it?
Yeah.
Like we have that,
Yeah.
you know, you check in. Could you just put a thing in there to ask us in there that we could give feedback in, that everyone can,
Sure.
you know what I mean?
Also, are you going to continue with the review questions that Massa does?
The review questions?
Yes. So Massa has review questions at the end of every week, and that's how we start our next week.
Okay. Are there review questions? Oh, there we are. They might be things to think about at the start, but I don't want to do it too formally, because we could end up just kind of recapping and not moving forward. But there's certainly. What do you think? What's your
I've had
opinion?
Massa as a lecturer. I've also had you as a lecturer. That's why I'm asking,
Yeah.
do I follow what Massa does, or do I follow what you do?
Yeah. Maybe they're a good thing to just touch on at the start, but I am also concerned that we could get 20 minutes in and all we're doing is going back to what we did last week. So end up like one of those reality TV shows where you never actually go forward. Mainly because I think I'm very distractible, and the dangers of me just getting distracted and talking about other stuff is, and please tell me if I'm doing that too. Don't, like, I do talk on tangents an awful lot. So I'm not going to be offended if you say, Scott, you're on a tangent again. And I go, yeah, okay, let's get back to it. But yeah, maybe that'll be a good thing to touch on, just to see how everyone's feeling about how we're tracking, to make sure we're all on the same page.
Do you read the discussion forums? Can we put it up there? Would that be a better way to go about it?
Yeah, I think I've switched the forums off, and Teams. You can post stuff on Teams too.
Oh, that was one of my questions. I was accepted to Teams for 13006, but not this class.
God.
No, I lied. I was accepted to this class, but it's been turned off because it's old. I don't know, something like that. Anyway, I can't access Teams for this class.
I will look into for next week what's happening with Teams. They used to do this automatic thing where they just created a Teams shell each term for each unit, and they're not doing it anymore, but I don't know what they're doing.
Okay, cool.
I hate to be the person who sits there and goes, I don't know what's going on with IT, because I'm pretty conversant with this stuff, but I don't know what they're doing. But yeah, the forums on Moodle are pretty awful, mainly because they don't thread any conversations. So what'll happen during the week is you'll just, me at least, will get messages saying, Stephanie posted on the forum and said, yeah, I agree. Okay, with what? I'm not sure. So Teams works better because we actually get the context. But obviously, if it hasn't let you in Teams or it hasn't set it up, that's a problem. But I will add that to my to-do list, to follow up on.
Fantastic.
Okay, I'll do that. I'll make sure I have the survey. I'll send a little survey out. The other thing about a survey is it can be anonymous if anyone's got any concerns. I mean, please don't have concerns that I will, be prejudiced about anything you say. But if you have got concerns, it might be fair. We're talking about fairness, aren't we? It would be fairer to have it as a. So yeah, I will send that out.
Just another quick question I had too, sorry. There's a couple of us in Townsville, so we were going to go on campus next week. Is there a classroom set up for the lecture already, or should I just book one myself?
There isn't one set up, but they did put in a whole lot of small discussion pods about 5 years ago, before the pandemic, that were set up for that purpose, so that groups of sort of 4 or 5 on campus could all sit in the same pod. So I don't know where those are, what the status of those are, but I think they're connected to the library and they're bookable.
There's 2 classrooms in the library that you can close the door on. But
Okay.
there's like classrooms on 2 other levels. I know with psychology, they sort of book them and stream them. I wasn't sure if Crim did it too.
Yeah. Don't, but if you need any help with it, let me know. And yeah, I think it's a great idea. Having some human contact with people in the course, really, really good idea as well. So yeah, if they say, oh, you can't do that, the lecturer has to book it, just let me know and I'll do it.
Cool. I'll stop by tomorrow and have a look.
Cool. Excellent. Okay, well, hopefully hear from you guys in the next week anyway, and then we will catch up again for the next module. See you later.
See you Friday, Scott. Is the next one
Possibly.
Friday?
I've got 3. I'm teaching 3 things this week, so.
Oh, okay. What's the other one you're teaching?
Wednesday I'm doing, I think that's the Justice Ends and Means.
Oh yeah, okay, cool.
You've probably already done. You probably did the law one.
Yeah, probably, because I got credit for that one. So hit the recording off, Scott. You have to recording on.